Next item is public comment. Is there any public comment in the room or on Zoom? Seeing no public comment. Next item is approval of the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? No. There you go. Next item is establishment of the regular agenda. Are there any changes?
No, there are no changes.
Perfect. First item is works in progress. Superintendent.
Great, thank you. The last board meeting, I previewed the back to school resource fair, and we had some wonderful photos playing in this room in advance of this meeting, just as we'd hoped maybe people would see them and arrive. Thank you to Jared Putney on the communications team for preparing that, and just helps to highlight the great work that's happening around the district. And I do want to share that it was a huge success. I got to stop by and see the huge, vast amounts of clothing that was available, and also recognize that a lot of the clothing actually had been picked up and taken advantage of as it relates to folks that had come in the first day. So it was pretty amazing. Nearly 1,000 folks came through. The haircuts were a huge success. We had tools for schools, kits from Issaquah Schools Foundation, and many other types of community resources available. So it's a much needed event for our community. And we will learn from that and continue to improve on it always. And this is going to become a hallmark, I think, of our preparation for the school year ongoing as a result of both the need and the success. So huge thank you to all of the leaders who devoted their time planning and launching something totally new for our district, as well as to the countless volunteers who spent time planning and executing and spending time at the event. I also want to thank everyone who has completed the enrollment verification process. Our school registrars and office colleagues have been following up with responses when they haven't seen a response from families, and it's been yielding some quite good results for us to be able to say that we are at 98 completion for the EV process as of yesterday. And this process is different from other school districts. And, the question has come to me, why, as I have, friends and so forth in other districts. And so even my husband asked me that question as well. And I said, well, it's because it's actually really helpful for us to plan for our district to make earlier adjustments before school starts for enrollment versus later. And that's only better for teachers to be able to make their adjustments as needed. And it allows us to gather early information and critical information cross-functionally in one location that allows for us to then get the information back out to families who might need certain parts based on their responses. So really, it's about having a more seamless experience as well for families. So that's on the enrollment verification process. And then as part of my start of year activities, I always appreciate the opportunity to see all of our administrators at our extended meeting to prepare for the school year and kick off. But I also set up time for one-to-one meetings, and I've had the honor to meet with over half of our administrators on a one-to-one or even 2-by-1 basis over the past few weeks. And this aspect of relationship building is so core to the culture of the Issaquah School District that as we have gotten bigger, I think it's important to maintain those one-to-one relationships and have that space and time. It certainly allows me the opportunity to strengthen my own relationships across the district, but also to gain insight and more specific details into what's happening across all the schools and all the departments. This week, as part of the back to school preparations, a special services annual workshop occurred. And I had the chance to share more about how their work as supports to our students support and advances the board's, I'm going to mess it up for a second, but the board's ends, which are district goals, which are now called results, and which encompasses, the goals for outcomes for students, as well as the mission and vision of the district and how this is reflected in the strategic plan. The group focused on their day of training and time together on the connection between universal design for learning and the continuum of services that we do have and offer for our students, the role of inclusionary practices and how that looks across that continuum of services, looking at data to focus on opportunity gaps and how to make progress when there's students that are behind. They discussed tools to support the development of individualized education plans, otherwise known as IEPs for short. And then the very important things about compliance and procedures that go on to support our students. Today, teachers came back to campus for professional development. And they have 5 days of professional development, which is also unique for Issaquah. We have one extra day compared to some other school districts. You have 4 days of professional development, which is an important investment of time for our teachers to prepare themselves, to prepare to welcome students and families. And I've gotten to see preparation on the ground over the past 48 hours at Liberty High School, Endeavor, and Cedar Trails Elementary Schools, and how they set the tone and support of welcoming back all staff and students and families. At Liberty High School, Principal Brownson, for example, has a theme stemming from Boys in the Boat and has set up crew teams across the high school that fosters collaboration and a focus on working together and rowing together in the same direction. And the bond information that sharing process is underway with our staff, and I'll talk more about that a bit later when we have our bond update as part of the agenda. But I want to thank our capital projects team, finance operations, academic and schools, communications team for their incredible partnership in preparing for all of this amidst our very regular, normal, busy time to just prepare for the start of the school year. And Martin Turney and I will share a bit more about that later. And that's the biggest set of items on my mind this week as we prepare to go back to school next week.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any question for Superintendent? Perfect. Next item on our agenda is 2024-25 Budget Adoption Resolution number 1225.
I move the board adopt resolution number 1225, which establishes appropriations for the 2024-2025 budget.
Okay, thank you. Martin Turney, Chief of Finance
Did
and
we get a
Operations.
second?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
Did I get
Second.
started a little early?
Sorry.
Okay. Martin Turney, Chief of Finance and Operations. So again, this is kind of the culminating event for our annual budget. At the last meeting, we did have the lengthy budget hearing and presentation that got into some of the details that are contained within. We have the draft budget long document attached to the agenda. And of course, the resolution that will make this official. We also have attached, there's something new this year where there's an MSOC disclosure. We showed you the numbers at the last meeting. So obviously we are spending more than the state is appropriating us for MSOCs, and we are just going to sign that. Superintendent will be the one signing that disclosure for you. And with that, I didn't have much else other than in the resolution, it does also show a required 4-year outlook that we attached as we submit. So any questions?
Did you have any community input or requests to review the budget documents over the past month?
No, I had no outreach in terms of that, and I haven't spoken to any constituents.
Board questions? No. We did spend a lot of time at our last meeting with a very detailed presentation on the budget, which we are grateful for. And it sounds like the board doesn't have any additional questions. So I think we have a motion in front of us. All those in favor of budget adoption resolution 1225, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? There you go.
Thank you very much. We will submit that tomorrow.
Next item on our, I will just say before we move on, I think it's almost offensive that you had to do extra work for the MSOC disclosure to highlight that we spend $18 million more than the state gives us for MSOC. And yet they have that statement saying, if you have an excess here, here's what you must show how you're spending for student achievement.
Right.
Like they're delusional in Olympia. So done with the commentary. Next item is monitoring report, executive limitation 5, internal financial administration.
I move the board accept the annual monitoring report for EL5 actual financial condition and activities, internal annual audit report as presented.
Second.
Perfect, Superintendent.
Great. I want to thank Martin Turney and Mariah Banasic for their work on all of our financial matters and making sure that we are doing what's right by taxpayer dollars. I do just want to note before Mr. Attorney launches into this that we do have an exception on this one, just due to an federal audit finding, which we have shared in other reports as well, because they're connected to the audit in the monitoring cycle. So I'll pass it over to Mr. Attorney.
Thank you. If we could scroll down just a little bit to the audit section. Again, this is covering the 22-23 financial and up just a little bit. Yep, right there where there we go. So again, we're looking back because this is the last year we've completed, issued financial statements and we're audited on. The exception there with the audit finding pertains to the federal audit. We did have a smaller federal supply chain, I believe, grant that our food service department utilized, and there were some records that were not as robust as auditors would like to see, and so we've corrected that based on their input. We don't foresee that being an issue going forward. So accountability audit, no exception there. Scrolling through, I wasn't going to stop on each item. We unless you have a question, yeah.
Just pausing right there. So for the audit finding, because that's not something that we really want to celebrate. But can you just highlight that my understanding is it's not that there was a lack of accounting for the funds or that they were misappropriated even for their designation by the federal agency. It's that they didn't like the record keeping for those funds being spent.
Correct. So to get into a little bit of the detail, our food service department receives invoice and inventory record with the supplies that comes in. This was particularly related to dairy. And so what our team did was they did their review, what we felt was an internal control that we were receiving the allowable product. They were marking this for okay to pay, and then we would process this as we normally would. So that process and our paying for it was appropriate. What the auditors took exception to is the level of detail on those invoices was not to the level they expected it to be. And so that is where they pushed back on our internal control. We had a bit of a discussion on how we felt that's a little different, but we were able to fine tune that and make sure that we have the level of detail that they will expect in the future. But we received the product, we paid for it adequately, and so there was no misappropriation or anything like that involved.
And we've been accounting for the product receiving of dairy like this for how many years?
Well, this specifically is a newer federal grant. So this in particular process is a little newer to us, but we, of course, in general, we do this with all of our food product, and we meticulously track and make sure we get what we're paying for continuously. Yep.
And when there's new programs like this, do they say this is how you should be recording and reporting this? So when we come and audit you, we'll have everything? Or is it just blindly, here you go?
Well, there are some general guidelines on how to treat the federal money in particular. It doesn't get to the detail of what they're looking at in terms of the detailed invoice. So in some respects, it's up to the auditor to determine whether they think our internal control is adequate. So in our case, we believe that they were a little bit more arbitrary than we would have appreciated, because we felt we had a control in place that met the federal guidance that we review. But again, the auditors are the final word on that. So
Thank you. Director Miranda.
On the same question, so I have a question about how we report it back to the federal government. Is it a reimbursement model? Is it a flat fee per student? So what kind of reporting then goes to the federal government? Because I know, my little itty bitty nonprofit with the federal ones, I have to show the receipt, fill out a form. It's complicated to get that money back from the government, and I don't get it until I can show I've spent it. Is it similar?
Well, most of our grants are federal grants are on reimbursement basis. This one actually came through apportionment directly to us. And so we received the funds to use in a particular way. And I don't anticipate at this point that there would be any recovery in terms of those funds. If that was part of the question.
Other questions at this section? Thank you.
I was gonna jump to number 4. This is often one that we talk about. We do have occasion where we have uncollectible debt. We've seen that jump a little bit overall. Now, it's still a fairly small portion of the accounts receivable. It's up. Last year, it was about almost $11,000. It jumped up to 27,000 plus. So again, this is largely our food service and before and after school programs. You see a history there that highlights just the before and after school program. And you can see it fluctuates in certain years. So it's not always that predictable. However, this is still a smaller portion of those programs coming with millions of dollars. And so we write that off once a year. And so we're looking back to the last time we did that, either September, October, I think was when we typically do that. Okay, I was going to move to the next section, kind of recapping, keeping the unrestricted reserve within the 3 to 7%. So some of this is really redundant to what we've talked about before and how we've ended the year. And again, it's kind of like a flashback to where we were at the end of last year. And we talked about it during those, once we closed the books and showed you the financial statements. So that's just really outlining that the district is still within that that range that we're required to be in. Skipping to, well, actually I should mention number 7 because it's pertinent to the board, the $1 million emergency reserve that we're going to continue to maintain there as required. There was no use in this period, although we did, I believe in the previous period, use that on a project. So this is now continuing to be maintained. Number 8, superintendent shall not undertake capital building projects without assurance of available funding. And we are absolutely still maintaining that. And we are reporting in our budget status reports and more in-depth capital projects reporting as we go along to make sure we're showing all the detail and are transparent about that. Number 9, about not expending more funds that have been received in fiscal year unless revenues are made available. Again, this is getting back to where we ended the year 22-23. You've probably seen this perhaps before. This is another breakdown of what that looked like. And that in that year, the unreserved undesignated fund balance being at 5.5%. So within the range. At this point, I was just going to take question and see if there were any other elements that I didn't touch on that you'd like to speak to.
Can you talk about 5 and 9? Because those numbers should be the same, but they're different. So why are they different? So what's highlighted in blue there, the same dollar amount, 44,440,114, lists it as 11.48% of the 23-24 budget. But if you then scroll down to 9, it lists it as a different percentage. So is there some nuance between 5 and 9 that I'm not understanding? And more importantly, when it talks about the unreserved, unassigned fund balance, that percentage and dollar amount is different between 5 and 9 that I'm having a hard time following.
Sure. So one element about 5, and I think this is not necessarily what you're asking about. I think you're talking about the evidence of the 44 million. The additional information, just to throw out there, has to do with the proposed budget that was passed. So that's a different section of numbers. So what I'm looking at the 44 million, that was 11.48 of the 23-24 general fund budget. And then the 9 being the actual year end, I believe.
Yeah, I think my question is when you say, so in number on page 4, which says the unrestricted undesignated reserve is 29,831,944. And then if I go to look at that same moment in time, why is that number, that dollar amount different in 9? And then if you look for the same dollar amount for the same budget year that's referring to, on the very lower right, 11.95 is different than what you have listed in 5. It's 11.5 something. Or 4 something, sorry. I'm having trouble toggling back and forth between the two. So.
Okay.
I think just some,
Yep.
you may not be able to
Perhaps
answer
we
that
can give
now,
you
but
some
that
additional
clarity of
Yep.
consistency would be helpful to me. For, especially about the unreserved unassigned fund balance, because that's one of the very items that the board is always very aware of and very concerned about. So knowing which number is the one for me to hang my hat on would be helpful.
Great. I think perhaps we can take a stab at making this a little clearer for you.
Other questions for the board? Director Maraldo.
Well, to that end, if they are different because it's incorrect on one or the other, I think that would be important because I wouldn't want to approve. I would want to table the motion until it came back with a correction.
We're happy to make sure that we are going thoroughly through this to make sure that we are clear about the question that was raised, and we can bring it back for future action.
So you're just withdrawing your motion then?
Well, I think we can have the rest of our discussion and like ask our questions and then I'll do it at the end.
Perfect. Yeah. While people are thinking of other questions or comments, I will say I appreciate you bringing clarity about the federal audit. I think I want to know more globally. If this is the second year that we've had federal audit findings, what are the internal controls or what is the communication and connection with our federal agencies and state auditor's office to get really clear about what we need to be doing? Because we as a board definitely will not be comfortable with continuing audit findings, no matter how insignificant and arguable. So I would love to know what steps are being taken. And that's what I didn't hear. So I can totally appreciate the idiosyncratic part of this that is annoying. Nonetheless, those are rules that every district nurse has to abide by and follow. So what are we going to do to make sure that we don't have this next year?
Certainly. So we are addressing specifically the audit finding that we have this year. We're also looking at our internal controls. So we have already started our conversation about reviewing particularly the federal grants earlier in the year. So we're going to set up internal controls as we believe, and we can check with the state auditor's office. So one of the things that we do have the ability to do is say, okay, here's how we're going to try to ensure internal controls on our federal grants. Do you believe that this meets your criteria? So we can get that up front. We can also do a later review as we've administered the grants throughout the year to make sure that what we're doing is we're achieving what we've set out to at the beginning of the year. So we will do a more robust review and set up with these federal grants.
Okay. And did that happen after the first federal audit finding? Or no? I know these came in quick succession because there was such a delay. So it's okay.
These actually,
no, I'm just
yeah,
curious.
these actually were, so this finding was occurred before we had the final audit finding from the previous year because of the delay of a year and a half or so. So it was something we were unaware of when we got the fine, if that makes sense. So the timing complicated it. Yeah. So we couldn't go back and do that level. So we're actually beginning the process that we would have after the first round of audit findings as we go into this current year.
No,
Yeah.
it totally makes sense. And
Yeah.
even because they look in arrears like we do. So that's the part that does make sense, that even if you're proactive for this current year, the next audit is going to be looking at last year. So there still could be things that are not addressed from last year that you're trying to fix for this current year. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's just the way audits work.
And we're certainly aware of the expectation, and we want to meet that and make sure that we are good stewards of all the grants and fund and money that we're responsible for.
I think
Rob?
to that end, first of all, I mean, 20 years of clean audit. So I am wondering what's going on at the auditor's office and our relationship with them, or or their relationship, especially with the federal government, does seem to concern me. Like, why do we continue to see there's some misalignment between what we seem to be okay with the federal government and we're not okay with our state auditor's office? My question would be, are they finding something similar in other districts? Because usually they pick something that they're going to be looking at everybody who's coming up for, so like Bellevue, I think is up for an audit or was up for an audit this year. Did
Like
they
the
find
FTC
something?
one that was found like in like everyone that they audited.
Right. So yeah, exactly. So like the, the FTC one, with regards to the hotspots, et cetera. So are we finding that this is happening to other districts around the state is what I'm wondering.
Sure. Good question. So this grant in particular, I've not seen the same trend as with the ETC. However, I've anecdotally been watching the weekly emails that come out, and I noticed there are what appears to be quite a few more audits or audit findings than what I'm used to seeing on those. But that's anecdotal. That's me just watching the feed. Yep.
So, but there's other audit findings, but is it in relation to this particular issue or it's other?
No, I haven't
issues?
seen the trend with this particular issue.
Okay.
Like we did before.
I'll just follow up with that and then pass off to Director Coyne. So feel free to answer after him. But does the audit scrutiny change when we go from a year where we had an audit finding to then roll into this one, and that there may be less give and take in the dialogue? Just a question.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't know.
what does change is we become what they call a high risk audit. So if you get a finding, you go into 2 years where they dig a little deeper. I mean, which means they select a little bit more than they normally would. So that is a fact there. Yeah.
So I guess maybe just a basic conversation or a question around how those audit findings are shared across districts. I know you said there's some type of reporting that comes out. Would we be able to see that for local? Are you able to see that for local districts? If there is a finding of some sort, so there's something to be shared across districts, or I guess just wanting some clarity on that.
Oh yeah. So what I do is I subscribe to the auditor's office alert. So when they release reports, we get the email that says we've released reports today. You go on there and you can see every entity, what their audit report looked like if they
Okay.
received a finding. And so that's how we kind of scroll through.
And so
see
you can
what's
find
happening.
those best practice, you kind of like, so it's a good indication of what something may have been missed in another district could be implemented here. So,
Yes. That's
okay.
correct. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Other questions? We appreciate this discussion, and I think for me, what I care about most is that the money that was dedicated for this use was used for that purpose and is accounted for. And whether there are technicalities of invoices, while I want that to be as it should be, I'm less concerned knowing that all the money was spent, allocated, and recorded appropriately. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Dr. Moralman.
If there's no other questions, I'd like to make a motion to table this motion until the September 12th school board meeting.
Second.
And do we vote on table motions or not?
Mhm.
Oh, we do. Okay, perfect. So
Before you do that, I think Mariah may have a little bit of information she can shed on it, if that's okay, before you go. Would that be all right?
Can we go back to that page with the percentages? It's page 4. Okay, and if you can go ahead and go up, so we'll start there. A little bit higher. A little higher. Okay. So, so right there, so the evidence for the 44 million, so it's a little bit lower, just a little bit. Okay, right there. So I think that was the percentage that you're referencing to, correct, Director Gallinger?
The 11.48 versus the 11.9 something on page 9.
Yes. Yeah, so that is why those are different is because they're referencing different budget years. So the 44 million, although that's the same number, it's referencing 23, 24. So the percentage goes, it changes, and then the other one is referencing 22, 23.
So my question is this report for the 22-23 school year or the 23-24 school year? I guess it's for the 22-23, right? This is what's
Yeah.
delayed, correct?
Yes, yeah, this is for the 22, 23. But the fund balance, so you don't know your starting fund balance until the beginning of 23, 24. So that's why there's a reference in there just saying, where did it end up in comparison to the budget for the next year?
Okay.
And then what about just the overall dollar amount? Why the unassigned fund balance dollar amounts are different?
Because the increase, so it was about $7.9 million increase of fund balance that would go into reserve for the next year, unreserved for next year. So that's why. And then you might change that at the end of the year when you reassign and do things like that.
So on page 6, then which one of those buckets become part of what is the 29?
So
million?
so for 22, 23, that is what was a part of our financial statements. This is what we submitted once we had completed our books, and you do this assignment during that time, during the financial statements. You also do it during the budget process.
I guess for me, then I'm not understanding why you would reference one fiscal year on one question and one fiscal year on the other. If there could be some clarity as to why those are inconsistent.
Yeah, and I think, again, we may need to just take this and provide a bit more narrative on how this flows. Because we are saying in this, the interpretation of we will not manage the budget in a manner that causes depletion of fund balance. Then we talk about some budget elements, and then we turn around and talk about an actual year end. And so I think the way that it's structured, I could agree. This is a bit hard to follow, and we're more than happy to go back and make sure the flow makes more sense. Yep.
I appreciate the clarity on the fiscal years. I agree with Director Moraldo, though it is confusing for us to try and track, because then at the bottom of page 4, you then reference through the additional information about this current year. So there's really 3 years in this single report.
Well, and I think noting too, just like you said, I mean, this may be what we're reporting on, what we're working, but I think explaining why we're going between different years, I think somewhere within the report would be helpful.
Yeah, point taken. Thank you. We just want to provide a little bit more before we're done tonight. Thank you.
Any superintendent reflections at all before we do anything?
Managing the timing of our fiscal year versus our calendar year versus monitoring years versus audit years is especially when we've had some delays, has been a juggle for us. But we appreciate the clarity seeking questions, and I appreciate Mr. Attorney and Ms. Banasic's additional explanation of the points in time. So we'll just need to make a linkage between what the points in time mean as it relates to the monitoring report and provide that kind of justification and clarification.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the table to table this for one meeting. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Perfect. The next item on our agenda is bond update. Superintendent.
Great, thank you. And so as I get started here, we're going to pull up the bond fact sheet for the district, which is available on our website. And we will also be having hard copies available at all of our school sites and areas where we might be receiving visitors. But there's three big highlights for me to start off before I invite Mr. Turney to join in here. Since he's been here all night, he will just continue to keep him on the microphone at the podium. But three big highlights for the board and the community right now. Our website is up and running for bond information, and we will be adding to that as we, get further questions and clarifications, and we'll update as needed. And that does, as I said, have this bond fact sheet available for download in PDF. We've been having meetings to share information with staff, as I alluded to earlier, and we are happy to join any organization or group who does invite us or wishes to seek further information about the bond, which is the 2024 School Modernization and Construction Bond. Today, Tom Mullins and I, Martin Turney, and Dr. Dana Bailey, and then Mr. Turney and I spent time with our transportation team, Endeavor Elementary School, and before and after school care team. So we are partnering and having different combinations of team members be in front of our staff to share information, but also answer any questions, but also provide resources for them as to where they can find further information, as well as support others who might ask them. And then finally, we do have many upcoming mailings and information that will be going out through our routine channels of communication that we do annually anyways, as well as some videos that will be coming out in a well-done manner. So we're very excited about that. And Mr. Turney, I'll pass it to you for additional information.
Sure. So I will just reinforce how much information is on the website right now, including if anyone wants to look at the tax projections, get into the weeds of that, we have that available. A lot of common questions, and a reminder that all of the bond advisory committee materials and minutes are available through link on that website as well.
Great. And this is just another opportunity for us to appreciate the work of the Bond Advisory Committee. We've had members that are part of the groups that we've been seeing today share that it was a very fun experience and a learning experience for them. Yes, 8 meetings in the evening for volunteers is a lot, but that was some feedback that was shared with colleagues today by a member of the Bond Advisory Committee. And I do want to reiterate that we get a lot of questions around our finances, and this past year and beyond, we have been focusing on providing more detail, both historically and current, about all of our capital projects and the use of taxpayer dollars and what has been completed and worked on. So that is something that the Bond Advisory Committee had an opportunity to deeply engage in and see. And as questions do come up, they can point back to that as members of the community, but also we have that available publicly for anyone to look at as well.
Is there time for questions? Board reflections, questions, comments?
One, this looks great. I love the one pager especially, and the website's wonderful too. And I think, it's getting a really good reception. Is there one thing when I'm looking at this and I'm continually communicating to the community is I'm doing the math on the percentages of kind of the buckets.
Mhm.
Is there a way to put that maybe on the website somehow? I don't know if others find that useful too, but just the percentage of, building modernization and energy efficiency. Because that's kind of where my brain goes, and I oftentimes communicate it in those buckets based on percentages versus the dollar amounts.
You mean
So-
the percentage of the bond package?
Of the overall
Okay,
bond
that's
package.
what I was gonna
Yeah,
ask.
yeah. Thank you for.
Director Taylor.
Just a very quick comment too. I really like this. I recall the one pager from the levy, which several years ago seemed to have maybe too much information packed into that one pager with the small type and all that. So this is great that I think it's boiled down, to some really just the key talking points, which is great. I really like it.
While people are continuing to generate questions on the website, I appreciate for the high school section, there's lots of FAQs. But the one about enrollment, I think, misses the target. Like it really should be answering the question about high school enrollment. Like I think the district enrollment conversation doesn't actually address why we're building and need to build in a new high school. So I think showing the trend of about where it was in 2015 when we went out for the bond, or at least the planning of that bond in 2016 through now. So it'd be great to see a single line graph which shows where we were in 2015 all the way through what your projections are through 2040.
Okay.
Because I think that's the part that's missing versus our overall enrollment. And that's a bigger conversation. Whenever we've met with the cities, and the conversation then has quickly pivoted to affordability. And that's their issue. That's not our issue. Our issue is to make sure that we can educate any student who walks through our doors.
Yep.
And I think cities sometimes forget that.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, the high school enrollment back in 2015, when the preparation for the 2016 bond was happening, there was a need for easing the congestion and capacity at our current high schools, especially Issaquah High School and Skyline. And we are several hundred up now. So that means that the needs still exist. And despite the backdrop of lower enrollment across the state and in our district from our high water mark as a total, we are seeing high and, sustained levels of enrollment at our high school, and even a slight uptick this year. So we can certainly show that. And I want to make sure I said that out loud because of your question here and comment.
One area that I like to highlight too is that as a district, we pride ourselves on being on a lot of top 10 lists. And one list that we're on that I don't love is having two of our high schools being two of the largest in the state. Do we have anything on here that could highlight that? Because I know that resonates too, I think, with the community. Do we have, and maybe I'm missing if we've have it in the Q&A.
I don't know if
Section.
we have the listing. We have a listing of the top, the largest high schools in the state, and we could probably add that. I'm not sure we have that right now.
I think it would be helpful. I think it resonates. We, as a district, we're used to seeing ourselves on lists, and that's not one necessarily we want to be on.
Totally agree.
Yeah, it's just.
Thank you for that feedback.
Yeah.
Concur as well. I think the other question, just so you know, I've asked our superintendent and CFO attorney to add is about feasibility. Questions have been asked to us about feasibility, and I asked about traffic impact at our high schools because I know that we've had to do studies for that. And so nesting right below the high school enrollment is the question I'd like to ask about. So what feasibility studies with regard to traffic impact for growth to be, housed at our existing buildings and linking to those studies that have already been done? Because I know that if we were going to go to council in Issaquah and say, so we're going to add 25% more students to Second Street, I think they'd laugh at us because they're like, yeah, no, you're not. And I think commandments would be very similar. Like, we're going to add 25% more traffic to 228th. And I think they'd be like, yeah. So it's been asked about feasibility. And since one of the first early feasibility studies that we are always required to do is traffic, if the first decision point is no, there's no more feasibility that needs to be done, because we already know we're not going to get permitted to add a classroom wing when we already have so much congestion in that particular location. The whole point of this, and then that's the part B of the answer, is to address congestion on Second Street. Like, adding additional capacity would actually address and decrease traffic congestion at our existing high schools, which would be a benefit to everyone in the community who has to go by there during commuter hours. And I know every time I'm headed to work and forget about a school, like, so it'll be like in September, like, oh.
Yes.
And I'm late.
I completely agree with that as well, though I've had the same thought just recently over the last few weeks that I think it would be it must be a complete non-starter with the city of Issaquah to tell them that we're going to put in many hundreds of more cars into that location. It's just not, it's, I would think, infeasible. So anyway, I think that's a great point that you're raising.
Can you go to the next page, Stephen, of the document, just so see it? I also asked the superintendent and her team to elevate through their dialogue in presentation, at least about early learning. And while the board, we appropriated money for them to to acquire land in the south end. We know land comes at a cost and we don't actually know what that cost is. But odds are not low that there will be bond money spent to build, complete, finish, whatever the word is you want to use, that early learning center in the south end. And so I do think it is part of our conversation, our dialogue. And it's interesting that certainly that's been a priority in Issaquah that I think resonated last night in Newcastle. And then if you're a Sammamish resident, like Director Coyne and I are, and you received the latest mailing from the city, it goes through the community survey. And one of the highlighted needs in Sammamish that was elevated by residents is access to high quality, affordable childcare. And so our messaging to the city of Sammamish Council, and then also through, the management, is it's really important that we are able to collaborate in areas where that's our expertise. And certainly, I think one of the ways we can leverage some of our existing space in our elementary schools, it's not like we're overrunning in space. I think that's the thing, is our buildings were so overcrowded and we had so many students in portables in our elementary schools. It's not that all of a sudden like we have empty buildings. It's that we have empty portables, which is a good thing. So, but we do have capacity to talk about, hey, how can we leverage this space to support the community? And that's why we are embarking in all these conversations with our counterparts in the various city councils across the 5 municipalities, because we want to leverage as much as we can our collective tax dollars to do what's best for every family in our district.
Another quick point. As we talk about traffic too, and I'm not sure, I know we've talked about this in the past when we've talked about the bond, and there's probably not a way to measure it, but I know as a result of traffic, there's a percentage of our students, high school students, who are late to first period because of that. They're caught on a bus and cannot get to school on time. We probably don't have any way to measure that, but I don't know if members of our community, unless you have a high schooler, are aware of how frequent that is. And it's not just a one-time deal. It could be literally every day. I mean, it could be almost the entire year. I mean, that's how congested 228 is when you're getting into Skyline High School. So I don't know if there's any way we could, probably not. I mean, I know, we can identify the number of students who are tardy, but I don't know if we know the cause of that. That's not tracked, is it? So
Probably a hard thing to connect.
yeah, I mean, there's definitely a connection with that, but I just don't. And and I think it's material. I think it's a larger number of students that are impacted by it than we probably would guess. But and I would hate for a student, when you think about that, a student to be late because of congestion due to the overcrowding at a high school. I just think the community needs to have a better understanding of that. And again, I don't think people know that unless you have a high schooler who is at Skyline or at Issaquah High. So
Yet I think everyone knows, like, you avoid our high school campuses
Yep.
during times school is starting or ending.
Yeah.
You only have to get caught in it once or twice before you're like,
well,
oh, I'm
I
not
think
doing
there's
this again.
that definitely, but I don't know if people necessarily make the connection that there are
Right.
students who are directly impacted by that and are late every day because of that, and aren't even necessarily going very far, really to get to school, but they're sitting on a bus or they're, I mean, and I think, and again, I don't know if there's a way to size that up, but it is, I think that's more material than maybe most people would think. That number is higher.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think where you could highlight it is, like, since it's a shared route between Skyline and Pine Lake buses are routinely late because they are going from to Skyline to Pine Lake, and
Yeah.
they're late. So
Oh, that could be something to measure. Yeah.
I think the other thing that I would add is, because this lower right box here talks about this and then shows that dip, I would add that part to the conversation in the tax information part of the FAQs to talk about why that is. Like, part of why the tax increase that we're asking, quote, increase, looks bigger than it would have looked had we gone out for a typical planning cycle. To remind people that in 2021, which would have been the planning year for the bond, we were appropriately distracted with educating our students through the pandemic. And so that's part of why that looks, to either through the FAQ about stable tax rates or FAQ about just highlighting that point, however you want to do it, or even in the why is the district asking for money now, you could put it there. But talking about that piece would be a really helpful thing. And again, a lot of this is to load onto our website. So we, as we're having these conversations, as we collectively, as anyone who's having conversations, can refer people to the website.
All great feedback and thank you.
Oh, just
sorry.
one other quick thing, question, because I know Director Gallinger has mentioned this before, and I think it's impactful. And again, I don't know, I mean, this could be something that could be added to the Q&A, but what are the impacts of not passing a bond, or districts that have gone through years where they haven't been able to pass a bond, and what does that do to community? We think of property values. I mean, that is impactful. And I think the community needs to understand what that means. I mean, we know why we're voting for it, but if you vote against it, what does that mean to the community that you live in? And I wonder if there's an ability to address that somehow in the Q&A. I don't know, but I know you've shared that before, and I think it's impactful.
We get to talk about that. It's really that the school district cannot do anything that could be conceived or as attempting to threaten voters on if they don't do this is what happens. So that's a really fine line for the district to
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
block
I guess it would be,
we-
could it be rooted in fact? Or is it too?
I mean,
Which is fine.
our whole presentation is rooted in fact.
Oh, no.
But-
I know, no, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that answering that question, rooting it in fact of what that, but I guess I get what
Instead
you're
of
saying.
advocacy,
Yeah.
but
I'll defer that to our superintendent.
Under consideration, but we also want to make sure we've been very clear around sharing facts, things that might have happened or been known already. So sometimes what could happen is speculation in the future, even if you project at what inflationary costs could mean. That's still, we can discuss that.
Yeah, no, I get that. And that's a good point. I just know that is, yeah, no, I understand that.
Other comments, thoughts? Okay. Well, thank you for this update. We appreciate it and look forward to maybe by the next meeting, there'll be a video that you can share with us all as the next bond update. Next item on our agenda is legislative matters.
That was quick. We have the amendments now to the handbook for the General Assembly for WASDA. And I will circulate a summary of those to the board to take a look at. Just so you folks are in the know as the General Assembly is coming up quick in September. So I'll have that information to you, and I continue to meet with fellow legislative reps in the area to discuss their reactions to those amendments as well, and continue to drive conversation around that to make sure we have common understanding. So that's the main thing going on there right now. And I have started setting up some meetings one-on-one with some of our legislators just to introduce myself in the role and start to have a conversation about what we can expect in January. But that's it.
Director Moraldo.
for me, well, when Congress is on its August break, when it comes back in September, it will have to deal with the budget. The budget year 2025 begins on October 1st. It is likely that they're not going to come to an agreement in 30 days. So it's likely that there will be a continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown. The discussion will be about, I mean, they're going to have to agree on to when the resolution ends. So the Democrats would like it to end at the end of November. The Republicans would like to extend it into the beginning of 2025 after the new Congress is put in place. I'm hoping that they might be able to leverage additional seats. So the showdown will begin in September. And then also of extreme note, I would say, is the Supreme Court denied the Biden administration's emergency request to reinstate its new Title IX rules that cover gender identity. And that happened, I think, last week.
And Director Taylor, to get your feet under you, I would offer, historically, we have had 2 board members meet with legislators. So generally, as you get them set up, we offer it to someone else as well.
Yeah.
We don't have 3 for obvious reasons. And then it would be great our next meeting for us to talk about what do we collectively think should be our singular or at most 2 asks, as we then it will help us work on our 1-pager
Yep.
next
Okay.
month. And so last year it was transportation funding.
Mhm.
I think it was helpful. Got an additional $3 million of transportation funding.
Yep.
Before the last year school year ended. And the year before it was special education funding. So neither of those things are fixed. I think the gaps just
Yes.
widen.
I was gonna say they may be very similar, I think.
But so we should, that way we could
Yeah,
know,
happy
help
to do
sort
that.
of like narrow down what our ask should look like, and then that can help us generate what the document looks like, which will kind of ground us in our conversations in the fall, as well as serve as a launching into our legislative advocacy when we do Day on the Hill, of which is not really happening this year through WASDA on a defined date. So FYI. Dr. Morales?
Well, and to that end, when we have that discussion, I would like to know, because my biggest concern is how things just eventually you keep asking, it falls off. SEB benefits are still, how much of that are we still paying out of pocket compared to how it used to be when we paid all of it, right? And we didn't have the state and we had our own. And when we moved to the state requiring us to utilize them, it doubled in cost for us. And I'd like to know what that impact is, because we just stopped talking about it. But it's like, wait a second, those are coming directly out of our levy dollars, what you fund us to be able to pay for SEB versus what we have to actually pay because teachers cannot opt out of it. Or the district can't opt out of it, I should say. The district, even though the teachers opt out of the benefits, the district can't opt out of paying for them. And so I would really like to know what that cost is that we continue. So maybe the conversation is rather about certain areas where we're paying out of levy dollars to an extent that they should still be basic education or state dollars and what that looks like. So that becomes a number like, here are all the areas, rather than we're going to talk about this area and this area.
And I think it could be yes and, I think historically we've had tables which show what excess costs to the district are. So including the SEB costs that we are paying, as well as, it could also include substitute costs, right? So yes, we are required to offer substitutes and the state does not fund them, would be another unfunded mandate. So we could just have a little table of top X number of unfunded mandates that come out of local dollars. Because I think they appreciate that information as well on the ground. So I think that should be part of our thing, but that still doesn't have to take away from like what we're saying our main like things are, because they're not going to fix SEB this year.
I don't want them to lose sight of SEB.
Agreed. Although I think they lost sight of it like 5 years ago. Anything else from your side, from legislation?
Mr. Attorney and I have had one meeting with Senator Wellman, and we have one with Lisa Callan coming up soon too. So we've been doing our outreach to just, introduce ourselves again, reintroduce ourselves for the school year. And so we will share as needed as we come across any information that's helpful for you.
Perfect. This may belong here, may not belong somewhere else. I think at some point there should be a conversation about the utility of our lobbyists and how effective that is and what the cost is. So Next item is announcements and correspondence. Anything to share? Next is calendar and future agenda topics. Most beloved topic of the night. And I don't see anything noted like that we have to plan for, which is really crazy. Like that's fantastic. There was a desire for us to schedule listening sessions for elementary feeder patterns for this fall. I'm not sure I don't recall if we did that last spring. Yeah, so but that would be something that we need to get scheduled pretty soon. And then we have 2 days together next week. So all of that information went out to you. So I would definitely carve out a couple hours at a minimum. No, it won't be as much as last time. Just a couple hours.
We can
This
talk it up though, because it is a lot.
last
Yeah.
time was
Yeah.
a huge chunk of time to
Yeah.
prepare for. But we had a lot to get you guys ready for now.
Yeah.
So a couple hours to prepare for a Monday and Tuesday would be great. And if you get questions that come up about topics that you want to make sure that make sure I'm aware of, feel free to keep me in the loop as the weekend goes by.
Okay, that's good. Report it.
Anything else from your end on this or about retreat? Because I know it's obviously we're trying to balance and minimize the impact to your team because you do have that important thing about starting school.
Yes, yeah. So questions that come up, get out as soon as possible. But obviously we'll adjust course as needed. And I always know the board is gracious when we say, oh, we don't have that right now, but we will follow up. So anything you can think of in advance, always helpful.